It's Michigan, Ohio State, the game. We're going to be dropping this less than 24 hours from kickoff. This is our preview of this year's unbelievable matchup. 11-0 Michigan hosting 11-0 Ohio State with so much on the line, so much more than just a berth into the Big Ten championship game, so much more than that. This game means so much to these players, the coaches, the fan bases, the states. The stakes really have never been higher in what will probably be one of the last true matchups at the end of the season. Everything's going to change with the 12-team college football playoff. Boy, I wish it was this year. And so many other things going on. The expanded Big Ten Conference to 18 teams next year. This game, this year, really is somewhat of a finale for so many things in this series. So we're going to get into all of the X's and O's. My name's Phil Kane. I'm your host on today's Wolverine Fan Therapy Podcast.
2nd, 1969. That they came to bury Michigan all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to bury Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away.
Hope everyone had a safe and healthy, happy Thanksgiving. And thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this show. If you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy this content, please do us the biggest favor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please comment and like. Subscribe to our podcast on any podcast service. We really appreciate your support. More to come on that in the future, but thanks so much for joining us this season, and what a great season it's been for Michigan fans. Ups and downs, crazy, and who knows what the future holds. All right, we want to get into a breakdown of this game, and like you, I grew up with this game. I grew up in Michigan. I've been watching this game. The first game that I really can truly say that I remember with clarity was 1976. But the first Michigan-Ohio State game that I watched was 1974. So if you think about it, this is really going to be the 50th consecutive Michigan-Ohio State game that I've watched. I was 5 years old at the time, so it's not like I remember it much, but I absolutely remember the 76 game where Michigan won 22-0, and so I want to talk, about the history of it and all the memories growing up. My brother and I would bring everything that had maize and blue in it, on it, anywhere in the house, and put it down in front of the television. And as I like to remind people, one of the reasons why the game was so special was because every game wasn't on television. This was one of the only games that we would actually get to watch live on television. Most years, maybe one other game was on TV, but most of the games we listened to on the radio. But the Michigan-Ohio State game was always at noon, and it was always on television, usually ABC. And the memories are special, and the entire family was around. Everybody knew what was happening. Everybody knew the storylines. Everybody knew what was on the line. And everybody remembers all those games. It's not like it's difficult to remember these games. They're easy to remember. So, and I think for that reason, all of us are products of our experience, and we all have that bias from watching so many of these games over the years. And we've watched so many games involving these two football teams, and we have so many distinct memories. And that's awesome. That's what makes it so special. But it also has a tendency to skew our view of the matchup. And we think of, both teams are 11-0. Well, remember all the times in the past where Ohio State was undefeated and Michigan derailed their season? Or remember all the times where Ohio State has ruined something for Michigan, or this and that and the other thing? And it tends to give us these skewed perspectives when the reality is this game is going to be decided by the players that are playing this year and the coaches that are going to be coaching this year. And even former players and well-paid college football analysts are subject to these same biases. I have, several well-known, I've heard several well-paid analysts over the last week saying things like, well, Ohio State has a better record in these top 5 matchups like this one. Or, well, Michigan has a tendency over the years to do blank in games like this. The problem is that those historical paradigms really mean nothing in this year's game. Once the ball's kicked off, nobody from those past years is playing. Nobody from those past years is coaching. And each team is different. I even heard one analyst say, well, remember, this Buckeye team just narrowly lost to Georgia in last year's national semifinal game. They were really only a few inches away on a field goal away from winning the national championship. Well, they said this as if this was the same exact Ohio State Buckeyes team. So that's the problem. Yes, that's all fresh in our memories. And that was absolutely what happened. But that's not the same team. This is a different team, okay? And just because several of the players are the same, sure, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Travion Henderson are the same, that doesn't mean it's the same team. And if you watch Ohio State play, this 2023 version of the Ohio State Buckeyes is a lot different than the 2022 or 2021 or other previous versions of the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the main reason is quarterback play. Ohio State has a solid college quarterback this year in Kyle McCord. He's basically a pure drop back passer. You want to think, as Michigan fans, to give you a perspective, this is kind of like the Ohio State version of Chad Henne or Brian Griese. I would say that Kyle McCord reminds me a lot of Chad Henne. He's a damn good quarterback, but he's very different than C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields or J.T. Barrett or Braxton Miller or most of the Buckeye quarterbacks over the last 20 years. To give some more perspective on why I'm really so excited about this year's version of the game as a Michigan fan is, for the first time in what seems like 20 years, going into this game, I think we can honestly say that Michigan probably has the better quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, not only based on his whole resume, but just his dynamic and dual threat as a player, his ability to run and pass, his experience, his explosiveness, is the better quarterback. And if you go back and look at the quarterback matchups in this game over the last 20 years, I mean, just think about it. So this year we've got Kyle McCord versus J.J. McCarthy. Think of the last several times that these teams have met in Michigan Stadium. 2021 is C.J. Stroud versus Cade McNamara. Michigan managed to win that game somehow, but that advantage that clearly gave an advantage to Ohio State. And before that, it was even more stark. 2019, Justin Fields just went off in a matchup against Shea Patterson. Clearly, Ohio State had the better quarterback. 2017, it was J.T. Barrett, who did get injured and was replaced by Dwayne Haskins. So half the game J.T. Barrett, half the game Dwayne Haskins against John O'Korn. 2015 was J.T. Barrett versus Jake Rudock. Now, that was Jim Harbaugh's first team at Michigan, and Ohio State was just more talented all the way around. 2013 was Braxton Miller versus Devin Gardner. 2011 was Braxton Miller versus Denard Robinson. 2009 was Terrell Pryor versus Tate Forcier. So you can see where I'm going with this. That's just the matchups at Michigan Stadium. Ohio State flat out has just had the better quarterback in nearly every matchup for the last 10, 15, 20 years. You really have to go back to probably 2007 when Ohio State started Todd Beckman against Chad Henne to say we had the better quarterback. But if you remember that game, Chad Henne was injured. He had that shoulder issue, could barely throw, and I think Michigan was held to like 6 or 7 points. So, yes, there is a question of whether or not J.J. McCarthy is healthy. But there's also a question of whether or not Kyle McCord is fully healthy. I expect to see J.J. McCarthy at his best, but that is a big question in the game. So I went through the list of quarterbacks. I'm not going to go also list all the running backs year by year, but suffice to say, over the past 20 years also been a mismatch most years at the running back position. Ohio State featuring future NFL starters like Ezekiel Elliott and J.K. Dobbins, among others, while Michigan would counter with solid players, but not future NFL starters, players like Fitzgerald Toussaint or Karan Higdon. But this year, the running back matchup I view as much more even. TreVeyon Henderson is probably the biggest threat to be a game breaker in this game, and he very well may be the best running back on the field Saturday. But Ohio State's without Mayan Williams, so the combination of TreVeyon Henderson and Chip Trayanum, I think, is fairly equal with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. So for the first time in maybe 10, 15, 20 years, we can say that the running back matchup is fairly even, and maybe actually you could give a slight advantage to Michigan. So let's talk more about this Ohio State team. The 2023 Ohio State team has really been led by its defense and the likely Biletnikoff winner, Marvin Harrison Jr. But they've also been really plagued with red zone scoring issues, inconsistent offensive line, and inconsistent quarterback play. They really have gone through periods where they have difficulty moving the ball. This is very different than what we've seen from Ohio State the last number of years. And then the thing that I can't get out of my mind in anticipation of this game is how Ohio State has really played poorly in their road games this year so far. At Notre Dame, at Wisconsin, and at Rutgers, Ohio State really relied on their defense and needed to mount comebacks in those games. In many cases, like Rutgers, they needed a 93-yard interception return for a touchdown to really turn the tide in the third quarter of that game. So yes, when I look at this Buckeye team, am I scared to death of TreVeyon Henderson? Absolutely. Am I scared to death of Marvin Harrison Jr.? Absolutely. But Kyle McCord, when you watch him on film this year, is really two different quarterbacks. There's the quarterback who throwing from a clean pocket, who is excellent, probably top 10, top 15 in the country. And then there's the quarterback throwing under pressure or having to escape pressure, and he's terrible. And so Michigan's game plan, I think, is going to be very clear, and that's to unleash havoc all over Kyle McCord. I believe that the number one unit in the Michigan football team is their defensive line. So I think this matchup plays right into Michigan's hands. I believe that this defensive line unit is probably the best defensive line unit that Michigan's ever had, featuring at least a minimum of 3 future NFL players and possibly as many as 5 or 6 future NFL players. I think this unit will flex its muscle on Saturday and show the country just how dominant that they are and make Kyle McCord's life absolutely miserable. My biggest concerns going into the game are obvious ones. Health. Both teams have had injuries. Is Emeka Egbuka healthy for Ohio State? They need him as a second threat to Marvin Harrison Jr. Cade Stover has fought injuries. Looks like he's healthy. That's a big deal for Ohio State. On the Michigan side, it's mostly on offense. It's obvious the health of J.J. McCarthy. Is he going to be able to run effectively? The health of Roman Wilson and the health of the offensive line. Look, if Roman Wilson isn't able to play at full strength, it's a different Michigan team. We saw that against Maryland. If J.J. McCarthy isn't able to run, isn't able to escape, isn't able to roll out, it's a different Michigan offense. So that's my number one concern. My number two concern for Michigan is the linebackers. Chris Partridge being fired, gone, linebackers coach, and just the linebackers having to be the main people to try to stop and prevent TreVeyon Henderson from breaking off long touchdown runs. So that's my number two concern. And then my number three concern is just a pretty obvious one, but Coach Harbaugh and Coach Partridge not being on the sidelines. I think it's a lot bigger deal than a lot of people think. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Michigan handles that. All right, you add all that up, and what do I think is going to happen? Look, I think this Michigan Wolverine team remains really angry and highly motivated to quiet a nation full of doubters and haters. There's plenty of motivation to go around. I'm not saying that the Ohio State team isn't equally as angry and motivated to not lose a third time in a row, to prove that they are tough after being called not tough over and over and over. I think that this Buckeye defense and the changes that they've made are damn impressive. But winning on the road in Michigan against the number one defense in the country, against what I believe is one of the best defensive lines in the country, with an immobile quarterback and a quarterback that has been mistake prone this year and at times has not looked very well and doesn't perform well when under pressure. I just think that's too much to ask for the Buckeyes. So as I always like to say, there's no certainties in life. There's certainly no certainties in football. There's only scenarios and probabilities. So given these 4 scenarios where Ohio State wins in a blowout, Ohio State wins a close game, Michigan wins a close game, or Michigan wins in a blowout, I'll put probabilities on all those. I think Michigan, because of their ability to control the game and the line of scrimmage, and I think that Michigan has a slight edge at both offensive line and defensive line. Not a huge edge, not a huge difference, but if you watch these teams all year long, in the aggregate, all year long, Michigan has a slightly better defensive line and a slightly better offensive line. So I think the chance of Ohio State winning in a blowout are the lowest. The game's at Michigan. Michigan just simply doesn't get blown out at home anymore. This team's not built that way. So I put that at 10%. Ohio State winning a close game. Obviously, I think this is going to be a defensive game and probably a little bit lower scoring, at least to start off with. So Ohio State winning in a close game, I put that at 25%. I put Michigan winning in a close game at 40%, and I put Michigan winning in a blowout at 25%. So I've got my confidence ratio at 65% that Michigan wins the game. And I would say that Michigan minus 3.5 looks pretty good. So again, why do I say that? I just think when you piece all this together, both teams are going to play their best football. And that means that you're going to see all their units at their best. And again, I go back to Michigan having an advantage at the quarterback position. And if you're asking, an Ohio State quarterback to go on the road and win against the nation's number one defense, to be under constant and relentless pressure, I just think that's too much. I haven't seen that from Kyle McCord yet. Now, could he do that? Absolutely. Anything's possible in a football game. He's an extremely talented young man. He's a great young man. Could he do that? Absolutely. Do I think he's going to do that? No. Why? Because I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen that from Kyle McCord. So it's not that Travion Henderson couldn't break off and have a great game. He could have a Tim Biakabatuka type performance and have 3 long touchdown runs and get over 200 yards rushing. So that's why the key to me, and one of my biggest concerns, is Michigan's linebackers. I think in the end, you're going to see Michigan with dynamic play calling. You're going to see a lot of use of Colston Loveland and A.J. Barner. You're going to see J.J. McCarthy attacking the edge with zone RPOs. I think you're going to see Michigan using the screen pass more, some on Saturday, and they haven't really used that much yet this year. And then finally, the reason that I have 65% confidence on Michigan winning the game is the mental aspect. I think that Michigan has won the mental game the last 2 years. And again, you're asking a little bit too much for Ohio State to go on the road at Michigan Stadium in one of the most hostile environments that they're ever going to encounter, probably one of the loudest crowds we're going to see at Michigan Stadium, and overcome this mental barrier that they have with Michigan, okay? They know that Jim Harbaugh is not going to be there. They know the pressure that's on Ryan Day and Ohio State to win this game. And I think at some point, when things start not going their way, I think you're going to see that mental aspect, that mental game starts to fall Michigan's way, and Ohio State starts to lose their grip of psychological control on the game. So I expect the third quarter to be where that happens, and you'll see Michigan pull away. I like Marvin Harrison to score a touchdown, and I like Travion Henderson to score a touchdown. But again, Ohio State's red zone issues flare up, and they only get 19 points. And I got Michigan with J.J. McCarthy mixing in a little bit of Blake Corum screen passes, Donovan Edwards screen passes. I like Colston Loveland to get a touchdown, and I got Michigan winning the game 31-19. Michigan 31, Ohio State 19, and who knows? Maybe they'll carry Jim Harbaugh around the streets of Ann Arbor on Saturday night as Michigan gets a rematch of the 2021 Big Ten Championship game, Michigan against Iowa, and hopefully this we'll have Jim Harbaugh back for that game. So that's my preview of the Michigan game. Look, in the end, it's going to be an awesome experience for everybody. I can't wait to watch. And win or lose, it has been an amazing season, and one that really is ringing in a transition period, not only for college football, the Big Ten rivalry in particular. So thanks for joining us today. Again, this is Phil Kane, your host for the Wolverine Fan Therapy Podcast. Thanks so much for your time and attention. Again, if you like this podcast, if you like this content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please support us and comment and let me know your thoughts. And go Blue!
This team's so good on third down.
It's the players, John. Isn't it obvious? You know, I mean, there's 20 guys here that are 22, maybe even 23 that'll be playing on Sunday next year, and there's another 30 or so that are right behind them, 35. So, 50, 55, almost 60, NFL caliber players right now, and other ones that are developing. It's hard to imagine that people can't see that the different comments that demean that, but it's the players. They're really good.